Hey folks, this is Matt Chat and this is my plywood canoe building adventure. It was supposed to be a cheap 2-week project, but instead it took a couple of months. I ended up building 2 canoes, built a canoe carrying dolly, a boat rack for my truck, and a hanging system for canoe storage. I made tons of mistakes and probably would have given up if it weren't for the money I had already spent. It became an amazing adventure, all for a canoe I wasn't sure I was going to use. Alright, I gave the sanding a good try with the small sander. It works, but it is fairly slow and I do have a lot of sanding to do. So if I do it with the small sander, I think it's going to take me 4 or 5 hours. So at this rate, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the belt sander and I'm going to go around and I'm going to go over and remove the rough top surfaces of the epoxy and right almost down to the wood, and then I'll do the final bit with the sander, with the smaller sander, and maybe that way I can not damage the wood or eat it up too much. So the belt sander was a good idea in about half the time. The time to do one little section here, about 2-foot section, I did the whole side with the belt sander. So I'm very satisfied with that, and I can come back and smooth it. And it's fairly smooth already with the belt sander. I did downgrade to an 80 grit instead of the 36 grit I had, which was would have been way too aggressive on the poor old pine here. Anyway, so that's done. I've got the other side to do. But I think I'm going to go over this side with the smooth sander first, the smaller sander, and get that mostly finished. And before I go back to the other side to get that done. Good morning. Yesterday I finished the sanding of the top of the canoe, the gunwales, and the end pieces, the triangular sections. So I'm satisfied with that right now. I've flipped the canoe over and I'm going to start working on the keel. I thought I'd just go on and start working on the fiberglassing and epoxy of the keel, but there's a lot of sanding to do first with the to get everything in the right shape and position, and there's some dirt that got into the epoxy. I want to remove all that stuff and everything, so a bit of sanding to go at here. So I'm going to get on with that first, and hopefully I can get onto the epoxy after. This is just to give you an idea of the keel, and it's straight, how straight it is, which I don't think it's very straight, but it's not bad. But as I bring this up here, you can watch the keel line and see it right to the end, and it's fairly straight. Acceptable anyways, not much choice, it's glued in there anyways. So let's start with the sanding. Good morning. Well, I did the fiberglass yesterday, and it's come out pretty good. I'm happy with the end result. There's some bubbles. There's places where it didn't adhere, but I have to say overall, I'm fairly happy with the look and the straightness. The material itself didn't really want to curve to that sharp curve. 90 degrees basically on the top there of the keel, but it did it mostly, and I realized that it was bubbling up or lifting up a little bit in a lot of places along the way, but I figured that with 3 layers of fiberglass it would be solid no matter what, way more solid than the keel, the wood keel underneath. And in fact, I had it resting on these stands when it was turned around the other way, and I had set up so that the stands had these cracks so that the keel wouldn't be touched, because I was concerned about damaging it. And though I was careful, it did shift a little bit, and it wavered out of that line, and the keel was damaged in one spot. Just that. So that tells me the keel would have been totally damaged within a fairly short amount of time if I left uncovered. So I think I did all right with that. Anyway, so now all that's left on the canoe for a trial in the water is to finish the sanding. So now I'm going to go over the canoe and sand it outside and inside. So that's going to take me a few days. There's a lot of sanding. But once I've gotten that done, I'm going to use those 2 days to think about the last few things that are going to be needed to be done on the canoe, which is install some seats and possibly an air pocket at the end of the canoe underneath the triangular pieces that I put at the ends. So those are the things that are left. I'm not sure exactly what form or if I'm going to do them, but that's the things that are left. Those are finishing jobs, essentially. Anyway, so on to the sanding. Good morning. Well, this is the day. Yesterday I sanded the canoe right down to readiness, and I blasted it with some air to clear off most of the dust off of it. So today the plan is to paint the outer surface with epoxy. Now, I watched a video online with YouTube from the people who make the West systems, and following their directions, what they suggest is you do it with the roller. You get one coat on, you let it get tacky, and then you come in with a second coat, and you let that get tacky, and then you come in with a third coat, and you let that dry. And they figure 3 coats is what's going to be enough to seal the boat properly against leakage. They were very clear in saying that you needed to have more than 1 coat to have a good seal. Now, the boat has already been painted with epoxy 3 times. It already has 3 coats essentially, but most of those coats have been sanded off. But there's a lot of epoxy already imbibed into the wood itself. So some places it's been sanded off. I can see it from here just looking at it, but I'm just going to have to live with that. Anyways, so the idea here is that's the other thing, is if you let it dry. I've discovered that. It's absolutely true. They don't talk a lot about this, but when you let the epoxy dry completely, a layer of wax forms on the surface, and it's really waxy. If you put 2 layers, one on top of each other, I think I showed that in a previous video, and you push them, they slide like they're on ice. It's unbelievable how slippery it is, and you can see the wax. You can actually take it off and you can see it. It's a tiny layer, and the point behind this is varnish doesn't glue to wax, glue doesn't glue to wax, nothing glues to wax. So the problem is if you let it dry, then you can't put another coat without sanding and cleaning to get rid of that wax. And the sanding removes the previous layer, a fair bit of it, if you're not careful. So the idea here is to keep at it. Now, this raises all sorts of problems that experience tells me exist. The roller, for example, and I've only got 1 roller left. I bought 2. I used 1 yesterday. Once the glue dries, that roller's no good, so you got to throw it away. Cleaning it, I guess I could try cleaning them, but I haven't thought about doing that. It's just as expensive to do that as to use another roller, because the liquid that you're using for it, which I would assume would be acetone, costs you money too, and it costs probably more, from what I can tell here, than the actual paintbrushes that you're using. Anyway, so by the time the glue has dried on the boat to the tackiness, it has also dried on the roller to tackiness. And that reaction of drying does not stop because you mix another batch. It doesn't suddenly get more liquid because you add some stuff to it. It is hardening. It's a chemical reaction. It could in fact speed up the reaction on whatever you're putting on to it. So you have to use a new roller, in my opinion. They didn't talk about that on the show. They just kept applying like there was no problem. But to me, I see that you need to have a new roller and probably a new paintbrush, because they want you to roll it with the foam roller, and then to do some a paintbrush on it to get rid of the bubbles and let it smooth out as a surface. And they actually used a part of a foam roller that they just slid across to kill the bubbles, essentially. But other videos have shown me that a paintbrush is used, and I don't see any reason not to use a paintbrush. If you do it fast enough, the paintbrush will be fine for getting rid of the bubbles, and it will allow the surface to smooth out. So, and I've done that before. I've done it here on this canoe with the previous layers, and it did smooth out. It's a really good paint for our product for smoothing out, even if you have a thin layer. You end up with such a glassy surface. Anyways, they also talked about UV protection, and they want you to put another product on top of that. That's UV protection. That means another coat of another sanding, and then another coat of some product. I'm not going to do it. I don't care. This boat will not be out enough to require UV protection. If it does, then I'll do it later, or I'll recover if that's what happens. Anyways, apart from that, I'm ready to give a start. So I think I'm going to mix a batch of my West epoxy and go at it. My final concern is the use of the epoxy, because surprisingly, doing all the things that I've done on this has used a fair amount of epoxy again. And I don't think I've been wasteful in any way. No, I haven't had any batch where I've had an excess that I've had to throw away. It has all been used on this canoe. So I'm concerned about whether or not I'm going to have enough material, enough product to finish the project, and I don't want to go out and buy another one. So that's why I'm going to do these 3 coats right now on the outside of this canoe. I'm going to get the outside of the canoe finished, and then I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to sand the inside and figure that out. If I run out of product, I'll figure out something with it. It's already been painted, it's been sanded down a bit, but it's been protected fairly well. So I might, anyway, deal with that if I come. I don't know if I am going to run out, but I worry about it because I'm going to use a fair amount of product. Because you see, when you use if your first layer becomes tacky, you've got a tacky surface on which you're putting a new layer of epoxy. That means your new layer of epoxy will not go as far. It's going to be a thicker coat because it's going to naturally be stuck to the previous coat. And I suspect that it's going to use up more epoxy. So each coat is going to be progressively thicker. That's my feeling of how this is going to work. Anyway, I guess enough worrying and surmising these things. You know, I've been thinking about this all night. I was worried about this doing this today has me concerned because it's going to be a fair amount of vigilance. I really don't want any drips, so I want to do this right so that there's no drips. When I watched the guy do it, there were no drips on his thing, but for me, I've had drips every single time I've used the roller. Every single time. When you start with that liquid, it is the epoxy. It is extremely liquidy, like water almost, and it will run. So it's a real balance of rolling that thing in the pan to try to get less epoxy on the roller, and then trying to put it on the boat. So anyway, there's no choice but to go at it. This is what I want to do, and I've got it to do. So let's get it done. That's going to be it for this part of my canoe building adventures. I want to thank you for joining in, and I want to remind you not to forget to subscribe to my channel. And hopefully we'll find a lot of progress in the next episode. See you soon.